Sir, you need to get out of that seat. Right now. I said get up. This seat is not yours. Are you deaf? I'm talking to you. Get out of that seat. What are you looking at?
My boarding pass says 4A. I'm in 4A. Is there a problem with the seat itself?
The problem is you. People like you don't just walk into first class and sit down like they own it.
People like me.
Yes, people like you. You know what I mean.
I want to make sure I understand exactly what you mean, ma'am. So please say it clearly.
She didn't. Her name was Leanne Crawford, 8 years with the airline. Platinum-blonde hair pulled back tight under her service cap, not a single strand out of place. She had the kind of face that smiled easily when she wanted to, and went cold just as fast when she didn't. She didn't smile now. She stood at the head of row 4, shoulders squared, one hand gripping the overhead bin like she needed something to hold on to. Around her, first class was filling up, business travelers settling in, laptops opening, drinks being poured, and every single one of them had gone quiet. Because they heard it. Every word. Donovan Reed set his newspaper down on his knee, folded it neatly along the crease. He was a lean man, 51 years old, wearing a dark navy suit that was expensive in the way that doesn't announce itself. No logo, no flash, just quality that showed up in the cut of the collar and the way it sat on his shoulders like it had been made for exactly him. Because it had. He reached into his jacket pocket, pulled out his boarding pass, held it out toward her between 2 fingers. She didn't take it. "I've already seen a boarding pass," she said. "Anyone can print a boarding pass." "Then you'll want to call your captain," Donovan said. "I already have." "Good." He put the boarding pass back in his pocket, picked up the newspaper, went back to reading. "Then we'll wait." 3 rows back, a young woman named Emma Tran adjusted the angle of her phone. She was 29, a freelance journalist. She'd been about to text her editor when the exchange started. Now her thumb hovered over the live button on her screen. She pressed it. 4,200 people were watching within 60 seconds. Donovan Reed checked his watch. A plain, steel-cased timepiece, nothing ornate. He noted the time the way a man notes something he already planned for. He had been sitting in seat 4A for 12 minutes. He had not moved. He had not raised his voice. He had said 9 words total, not counting questions. And Leanne Crawford, standing in the aisle of her own aircraft, Taco Bach Kim, catching the overhead cabin light, had no idea who this man was. She was about to find out. Captain Greg Hollowell came through the curtain like a man used to walking into problems and solving them fast. 58 years old, broad across the shoulders, 23 years with the airline. The kind of pilot passengers felt safer just knowing was at the front of the plane. He scanned the cabin in under 2 seconds, saw Leanne standing stiff at row 4, saw the man in 4A newspaper on his knee, not sweating, not shifting, not doing any of the things people do when they know they're in the wrong. That first detail registered somewhere in Hallowell's gut. He filed it, moved forward anyway. "What's the situation?" Leanne pulled him 2 steps toward the galley. She kept her voice low, but not low enough. The man in 3B heard everything. So did the woman in 5A. So did Emma Tran, whose phone was quietly capturing every syllable. "He won't show proper documentation. He won't move when asked." "Captain, look at him. Does anyone sitting there look like first class to you?" Hallowell looked. Expensive suit, calm posture, hands folded on a folded newspaper. No fidgeting, no anger. The kind of stillness you only see in people who've been through worse than this and came out the other side intact. Nothing about the man screamed threat, but Leanne's voice was tight in a way Hallowell hadn't heard from her in 8 years, and she hadn't lied to him before. He stepped forward. "Good morning, sir. I'm Captain Hallowell. There seems to be some confusion about the seating assignment. Could I trouble you for your boarding pass?" Donovan Reed reached into his jacket pocket without a word, held out the boarding pass. Hallowell examined it. Southwest Airlines, Flight 2847, Seat 4A. Printed that morning at 6:51 a.m. The barcode had already been scanned at the gate. There was no issue, no flag, no problem. Everything looked exactly right. "This appears to be in order," Hallowell said slowly. "It's a forgery," Leanne said. Her voice didn't waver. "Or it was purchased through some secondary market. Captain, those seats cost real money. He probably used miles he doesn't even have." Donovan looked at her. Just looked. "I paid full price," he said. "This morning. Cash equivalent through my corporate account. The transaction cleared at 6:43 a.m. You can call reservations and confirm that in approximately 90 seconds. The specificity of it made Hallowell's stomach tighten. Most passengers couldn't tell you what time they booked their flight. They couldn't tell you which card they used. They couldn't give you a transaction timestamp down to the minute. This man could. Hallowell cleared his throat. "Sir, I'm going to need to ask you to accompany us to the gate desk so we can—" "No." One word. "Clean." No anger behind it, but no flexibility either. The word landed in the cabin like a stone dropped into still water. Hallowell blinked. "I beg your pardon?" "I said no, Captain Hallowell. I'm not going to the gate desk. I'm not deplaning. I'm not moving. I'm going to sit in the seat I was assigned, and I'm going to read my newspaper. When you've verified my ticket through your reservation system, you'll find everything in order. And then this conversation will be over." Leanne stepped close to Hallowell's shoulder. "He's been like this since he sat down," she said quietly. "Uncooperative, possibly dangerous. The other passengers are uncomfortable." Hallowell looked around the cabin. The businessman in 3A was staring at his phone screen but not looking at it. The couple in 5C had stopped talking mid-sentence. A teenager in 6B had been recording for at least 3 minutes. Emma Tran in 6A had her phone propped against the seat pocket at an angle that looked casual but wasn't. 9 devices. At least 9. "Sir," Hallowell said, and his voice carried the weight of a man who had handled real emergencies at real altitude and was not accustomed to being told no. "This is a safety matter. I'm asking you to deplane voluntarily so we can resolve this calmly." Donovan Reed reached into the breast pocket of his jacket. Hallowell tensed. Donovan produced a slim leather wallet, opened it, placed a single card on the tray table face up. A black American Express Centurion card, the kind that required a $10,000 annual fee just to carry. The kind that showed up in financial magazines as shorthand for a different level of wealth. Hallowell had seen one once years ago at a charity gala. He had never seen one on a plane. "That doesn't explain anything," Leanne said, but her voice had changed register slightly. Something had shifted behind her eyes. Donovan didn't look at her. He looked at Hallowell. "Captain, before you make your next decision, I want to make sure you understand something. This cabin is currently being recorded by at least 9 devices. Your flight attendant has made several statements in the past 4 minutes that federal consumer protection law classifies as discriminatory. And in approximately 40 seconds, you're going to receive a phone call." Hallowell felt the moisture leave his mouth. "What kind of phone call?" Donovan picked up his newspaper. "The kind that changes careers, Captain. The kind that makes national news. The kind that companies spend years trying to recover from." He didn't say it loud. He didn't say it fast. He said it the way a man states a forecast when he already knows the weather. Hallowell's radio crackled. "Southwest Operations Center, urgent." Hallowell held up one finger, the universal signal for wait. He stepped back toward the galley, pressed the radio to his ear, listened for 15 seconds. His face didn't change, but something behind it did. Something moved through his eyes that hadn't been there before. He lowered the radio. Leanne was watching him, waiting. She had been in this career for 8 years. She had handled difficult passengers. She had handled actual, dangerous ones. She had called security before, and she would call security again, and she had never once doubted her own read on a situation. She didn't doubt it now, not yet. "Captain, I need you to make a call. We are 7 minutes from departure. Every minute we sit here costs the airline money and frustrates 147 paying passengers. This man is disruptive. He refuses to comply. We call security, and we move on." Hallowell looked at her, Then he looked at the man in seat 4A. Donovan Reed was reading his newspaper. Or at least he appeared to be. But he wasn't turning pages, he was waiting. Quietly. The way a man waits when he has already done everything he needs to do, and now the clock just needs to run down. Hallowell said, "Leanne, let's give him a moment to—" "A moment?" Her voice went up half a step. Not loud, but sharp. The kind of sharp that cuts through ambient noise and lands in every ear in a 10-row radius. "Captain, I have been doing this for 8 years. I know who belongs in this cabin and who doesn't. I look at 1,000 faces a week. I know." She pointed, not at his ticket, at him, at the man. "He does not belong here." The cabin went absolutely silent. Not the comfortable silence of cruising altitude, the terrible silence of a thing that cannot be unsaid. Emma Tran's live stream counter jumped from 14,000 to 22,000 in 11 seconds. Donovan Reed lowered his newspaper. He didn't look at Leanne. He looked at Hallowell. Only at Hallowell. And when he spoke, his voice was quiet enough that the captain had to lean in slightly to catch every word. "Captain Hallowell, I want to ask you something, and I want you to think before you answer." Hallowell said nothing. "In 23 years of flying, how many times have you personally asked a white passenger sitting in first class to prove that their ticket was real?" The silence stretched. Hallowell opened his mouth, closed it. He started. "We follow—" "How many times?" He couldn't answer. Not because he didn't want to, because he was doing the math in real time, running back through 23 years of faces and incidents and decisions, and the number forming in his head was the kind of number that once you see it clearly, you can't look away from. 0. Not once. Not once in 23 years had he looked at a white man in an expensive suit in a first-class seat and felt the need to verify that the seat was actually his. Donovan Reed nodded slowly. Just once. Like he already knew the answer. "Before you call security," he said, "I want you to know something, not as a threat, as information." He reached into the calf of his leather briefcase and removed a folded document. Didn't open it, just held it. "I have been sitting in this seat for 12 minutes. Your crew member has made 4 statements in those 12 minutes that constitute, under Federal Aviation and Consumer Law textbook, discriminatory conduct. All 4 statements are currently on record, on at least 9 devices. Being watched right now by—" He glanced at Emma Tran's phone, and Emma, startled, turned the screen so he could read the counter. 31,000 people. Hallowell's radio crackled a second time. Louder this time. More urgent. "Captain Morrison, this is Southwest Operations Center. Stand by for executive-level instruction. Do not proceed with passenger removal. Repeat, do not proceed." If you've ever watched something unfair happen right in front of you and felt completely powerless to stop it, stay with me, because what this man did next, sitting quietly in that seat while 31,000 people watched it, wasn't just brave. It was something he had been preparing for his entire life. Hit like, subscribe to our channel, and don't go anywhere. The next part of this story is going to change the way you think about patience, power, and who this world decides to believe. But to understand why that man sat still for 12 minutes without moving, without raising his voice, without reaching for his phone or his legal team, or any of the weapons he clearly had available to him, you have to go back. Not 12 minutes, not 12 hours, 31 years. Atlanta, Georgia, 1993. Vine City. A neighborhood in the southwest part of the city that the rest of Atlanta mostly drove around rather than through. Streets where the sidewalks crumbled at the edges and never seemed to get repaired. Houses with screen doors that didn't quite fit the frames. Corner stores with hand-painted signs. Not a bad place to grow up, but a place where certain things were already decided before you were old enough to have an opinion about them. Donovan Reed was 7 years old. He was sitting next to his mother on a city bus. It was a Tuesday. He remembered Tuesdays because his mother didn't work Tuesday mornings, which meant she could walk him to school instead of leaving before he woke up. Ruth Reed was 34 years old. She cleaned rooms at the Marriott downtown 5 days a week and worked the late shift at a packaging facility on Fridays and Saturdays. She was not a large woman. She had small hands, the knuckles roughened from cleaning solutions and cold water, and she smelled like the lavender soap she bought in bulk because it was cheaper by the bottle. She always smelled like lavender. They were 2 stops from Donovan's school when the woman boarded. She was maybe 45, blonde hair, platinum at the roots fading to a yellowish color at the ends, cut in a sweep across her jaw. A cream-colored blazer. Her perfume entered the bus before she did. She looked down the aisle, saw the open seat next to Donovan. Saw Donovan. Her expression didn't change, not into something ugly, just into something flat, decided. She turned to the bus driver. "There's a different seat in the back." There wasn't. The bus was almost full. "Just that one, ma'am," the driver said without looking up. The woman looked at the seat again, at Donovan, at Ruth. "Could you move?" She said it to Ruth, not unkindly, the way you ask someone to pass the salt, like it was just a small and obvious request. "I prefer not to sit quite so close. You understand." Ruth understood. Ruth always understood. That was the part that made Donovan's stomach tighten years later when he was old enough to understand what he'd witnessed. She hadn't fought, hadn't argued. She had simply gathered her bag, put her hand on Donovan's shoulder, and guided him toward the back of the bus with the quiet efficiency of someone who had learned to absorb these moments without letting her son see them land. 2 rows back. She settled him into a seat by the window. The woman in the cream blazer sat down in the spot they'd just left. Donovan watched her open a magazine. Ruth leaned down close to his ear. She said 7 words, just 7. And Donovan Reed was quiet for the rest of the bus ride. He was quiet that whole school day. He was quiet at dinner. But somewhere in the silence, in that 7-word space his mother had made for him, something else was building. Not rage, not bitterness. Something colder and more patient than either of those things. A decision. He didn't have the language for it at 7 years old. He couldn't have told you what it was if someone had asked him. But it was there. The way a root is there before the tree. The woman in the cream blazer with the platinum-blonde hair got off 2 stops later. She didn't look back. Donovan Reed would not think about her for years. But he would remember what his mother said. He would remember it in a cold university classroom when a professor looked at him and asked if he was sure he'd enrolled in the right department. He would remember it in the lobby of a company that didn't call back. He would remember it every time a room full of people looked at him and decided they already knew the answer before he'd spoken a single word. And he would remember it 31 years later, sitting in seat 4A, 30,000 feet above the American Midwest, while 31,000 strangers watched a woman with platinum-blonde hair point at him and say he doesn't belong here. He remembered those 7 words, and he stayed in his seat. Vine City in the 90s was the kind of neighborhood that didn't make the brochures. It sat about 1.5 miles west of downtown Atlanta, close enough that you could see the skyline from the right rooftop, far enough that nobody from the skyline ever came to look at you back. The streets had names that sounded like somewhere else: Magnolia, Simpson, Sunset. But the gap between the name and the reality was a particular kind of Atlanta joke that nobody found funny if they lived there. The houses were mostly wood-framed bungalows. Some had yards. Most had porches where people sat in the evenings, not because it was picturesque, but because the inside of the house was hot and the outside was marginally less so. Neighbors knew each other not by choice, but by proximity. The walls were thin. The blocks were small. You learned people's business whether you wanted to or not. Ruth Reed rented the 3rd house from the corner on a block called Vine Lane. 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, a kitchen that let in a cold draft every winter through a gap in the baseboard that the landlord had promised to fix since 1991. She kept a place immaculate. That was the first thing Donovan always noticed coming home from school. However tired she was, however long the shift had been, the kitchen counter was always clean. The floor was always swept. There was always something warm on the stove, even if it was just broth and rice. Ruth Reed refused to let poverty be a reason for disorder. Disorder cost you things she wasn't willing to lose. Donovan understood this without being told. He was quiet that way, even as a small child. He watched how his mother moved through the world, the efficiency of her, the way she never wasted motion or energy or emotion in front of him. She saved those for after he went to sleep, and he knew it, even if he never said so. School was fine. That's the honest way to describe it. Fine. The buildings were old. The textbooks were older. Some of them still had presidents in them who died before Donovan was born. The teachers ranged from genuinely dedicated to clearly counting down to retirement. There were 31 students in Donovan's 5th grade class, and one set of science equipment between all of them. Fine. But Donovan read everything he could find. That's the part that nobody around him understood, or rather, nobody commented on enough to make it meaningful. He read the way some kids play sports, constantly, hungrily, without being asked. He read the back of cereal boxes and the fine print on grocery store receipts and the newspapers left on seats of the number 3 bus. When he was 10, he found a book in the donation bin outside the public library on Joseph E. Boone Boulevard. The cover was torn halfway off. The spine was creased so many times it had gone white. It was called Commercial Aviation Systems Economics and Operations, published in 1987, probably abandoned by a college student who'd long since graduated. Donovan took it home and read it in 3 days. Then he read it again. He found the numbers fascinating, not the altitude or the speed. Those were interesting, but they were facts. What pulled him in were the economics, the cost per available seat mile, the load factor calculations, the fuel hedging strategies, the way a single percentage point change in on-time performance could ripple out into millions of dollars of cascading costs across a network. He was 11 years old, reading about fuel hedging strategies. He didn't have anyone to tell this to who would understand why it mattered. His mother listened because she always listened, but she understood people, not systems. She understood effort, not leverage. So he kept most of it inside and just read more. Then came the summer he was 14. The city was hosting an aviation trade show at the Georgia World Congress Center. Booths from Boeing and Delta and a dozen regional carriers. Scale models hanging from the ceiling. Actual turbine engines on display behind plexiglass. The whole thing smelled like ambition and money and a future that felt, from certain angles, theoretically accessible. Donovan had saved for 4 months. Not a lot of money, enough for the admission ticket, the bus fare both ways, and a granola bar. He counted it out carefully the night before, quarters and $1 bills laid out on the kitchen table. $22.70. He dressed in his good clothes, the button-down shirt his mother had bought for Easter. He took the number 3 bus downtown, walked the 3 blocks to the entrance, stood in line. The guard at the door looked at him, looked at his ticket, looked at him again. "This event is for industry professionals and registered guests," the man said. He was white, heavy-set, a name tag clipped to his shirt that Donovan would forget within the year, but remembered precisely in that moment. "It says general admission on the ticket," Donovan said. "General admission for registered attendees." "The website didn't say that. It said anyone could buy." "Son," the word came out flat, patient in the way that isn't actually patient at all. "I think you might have gotten confused. This isn't really for—" He looked at Donovan, completed the sentence without words. Donovan stood very still. He thought about his mother. He thought about the 7 words. He didn't make a scene. He didn't argue past the point where arguing would cost him more than the admission price. He took a step back from the line, turned around, found a spot on the sidewalk near the glass wall of the building where, if you stood at exactly the right angle, you could see the edge of the exhibition floor inside. He stood there for 2 hours. He memorized what he could see through the glass. He read the names on the company banners. He studied the angle of the aircraft models hanging from the ceiling and calculated their approximate wingspan based on what he knew about scale modeling ratios from the book. Then he took the bus home. Ruth didn't ask him how it was when he came in. She looked at him once. Then she put a bowl of soup in front of him and sat down across the table and waited until he was ready to talk. He wasn't ready that night. but he kept the ticket stub. Folded into quarters, tucked into the back cover of the aviation book. He kept it until the book fell apart completely, and then he kept the stub by itself. He knew what it meant. It meant not yet. It did not mean not ever. He got into Georgia Tech on a scholarship. One scholarship. No safety net, no backup plan. Ruth had made that clear not to frighten him, but to make sure they both understood the weight of the thing. If the scholarship fell through, there was no plan B. There was just Vine City and a different future. And she would love him through that, too. But she wanted him to go. "You got in," she said when the letter came. Not congratulations, not I'm so proud. Just those 3 words said in the kitchen with her hands still damp from washing dishes. Like she'd already known the answer and was just confirming it out loud. Georgia Tech was 45 minutes from Vine City by transit. It felt like another planet. The engineering school occupied a cluster of buildings that smelled like dry erase markers and machine oil. The hallways had a particular quality, the click of heels on polished floors, the low hum of people who were convinced they were going somewhere. Donovan was used to that hum from the outside. He wasn't used to being inside it. His first week, he moved into the dorm with a single duffel bag and the aviation book, which by then was held together with a rubber band. His roommate had 2 suitcases, a laptop, a mini fridge, and a small television. His roommate's parents had helped him move in. They'd brought a plant. Donovan didn't comment on any of it. He found the library that first afternoon and located the aeronautical engineering stacks. He didn't take books out. He sat with them in the stacks and read until the building closed, and then he went back the next morning. The first real challenge came week 2, Introduction to Aerospace Systems, Dr. Whitfield's class. The professor was a compact, precise man in his late 50s, thinning blonde hair gone silver at the temples, with the habit of beginning every semester by surveying his new students with a kind of clinical skepticism, as if calculating how many of them would still be in the program by spring. He stood at the front of the lecture hall on the second day and threw out a question without warning. Calculate the drag coefficient for a cylinder with a Reynolds number of 5 times 10 to the 5th power. He looked around the room. Then he looked at Donovan. "You, in the back, can you do it? Not what's your name. Not let's start with an introduction, just can you do it?" The room went very quiet. 32 students, most of them white, a few not. Most of them from families that had sent kids to college before and would again. Most of them looking at Donovan now with the low-level collective curiosity of people who've just seen something unexpected. Donovan had done this problem the summer before enrollment. He had found the formula in a textbook he borrowed from a high school physics teacher who'd taken pity on him during senior year. He gave the answer. Whitfield didn't react for a long beat. Then he turned back to the board. "Correct," he said, and moved on. That was it. No acknowledgement, no follow-up, just correct and the squeaking of a dry erase marker. But Donovan understood what had just happened. He had been tested publicly in a way that the other students hadn't been. And he had passed. And the professor had moved on precisely because there was nothing else to say. Donovan sat in that class for 3 more semesters. He always answered when Whitfield called on him. He was always right. There were no textbooks Donovan could afford to buy outright. He took detailed notes. He memorized formulas. He borrowed books for exactly 2 weeks at a time from the library and sat in the stacks reading them the way other students binge-watched television intensively and without breaks, because returning them on time wasn't just courtesy, it was the only way someone else could access them too. His coat, a gray fleece-lined thing with a zipper that stuck, lasted all 4 years. The cuffs started fraying in sophomore year. By junior year, the collar was going. He wore it anyway. There was no replacement. He graduated with a 3.94 GPA. Honors. He shook the dean's hand at the ceremony. His mother was in the 3rd row. She was wearing the same dress she'd worn to church every Easter for the past 7 years. She was crying, but she was already done by the time Donovan found her outside, so he never had to see it. She just handed him a card she'd bought from the dollar store. Inside, she had written, "Now go build something." He kept that card in his wallet for 19 years, until it dissolved at the edges and had to be retired. He remembered every word. He sent applications to 11 airlines. This was the part of the story that didn't make the LinkedIn profile, didn't come up in the boardroom introductions, didn't get mentioned when people asked about his background at conferences. This part. The 11 applications to 11 airlines. The 11 silences that followed. He wasn't applying to fly the planes. He had an engineering degree, not a pilot's license. He was applying for systems analysis positions, operations roles, route optimization, fleet efficiency, cost modeling. The intersection of mathematics and logistics that most people found dry, but that Donovan had understood since he was 11 years old, reading about load factor calculations on a bus in Vine City. He was qualified, more than qualified. But the airline industry in the early 2000s had a particular way of looking at resumes from candidates it hadn't been expecting, and Donovan Reed was not what the industry had been expecting. 11 applications, not one callback. He widened the search. Logistics companies, shipping firms, transport companies that moved things other than people. One of them called back. A mid-sized freight logistics firm in Atlanta's outer suburbs, operating out of a low building near I-285 with a parking lot that flooded every spring. He took the job. His starting salary was enough to move out of the one-bedroom apartment he'd been sharing with a college friend and into his own place. It was not enough for much else. His workspace was a desk in the corner of the operations floor. No window. The fluorescent light above him flickered for the first 3 months until someone finally replaced the bulb. His computer was 2 years past the standard refresh cycle and ran slowly, so he learned to structure his analyses to run overnight while it processed. He didn't complain. He worked. His manager's name was Derek Sutton. Sutton was not a bad man. He was a practical man. He had been running the same operations model for 7 years. It worked well enough, and he saw no particular reason to change it for a new hire who was, when you got right down to it, paid to enter data and generate weekly summary reports. 18 months into the job, Donovan submitted a memo. It wasn't requested. He just left it on Sutton's desk on a Tuesday morning in a plain manila folder. 12 pages, single-spaced. A complete restructuring of the company's southeastern delivery routing with projected fuel savings, projected time reductions, projected cost impact across 5 different variables. The bottom line? $2.3 million in annual savings. Sutton read it over the weekend. On Monday morning, there was a meeting. Not with Donovan. The meeting was with Sutton and his manager and 2 people from the finance department. Donovan sat at his corner desk and heard the voices through the conference room wall, which was thin. He couldn't make out the words, but he recognized the energy, the quickening. The memo became a proposal. The proposal went to the executive team. The executive team approved it. 3 months later, the new routing model was implemented company-wide. At the all-hands meeting where the results were announced, a $2.1 million improvement in year 1, on track for $2.4 in year 2. Derek Sutton stood at the front of the room and walked through the methodology. He didn't mention Donovan's name. Not once. Donovan sat in the 3rd row and watched a room full of people applaud something he had built, and he thought about his mother at the kitchen table, keeping the place clean, not because anyone was looking, but because it mattered. He thought about what she would say right now. And then he started thinking about the next memo. It took him 4 more years at that company. 4 more years and 7 more memos that made it into implementation, and one that was too far ahead of where the company was willing to go. He saved them $6.8 million in total, according to his own accounting, which nobody asked for but which he kept in a folder on his home computer because numbers were something you kept. Then he left. Not in anger. He gave proper notice. Thanked Derek Sutton, who had become in his limited way someone who respected what Donovan could do, even if he hadn't always credited it. Sutton shook his hand and said, "You're wasted here," which was the most honest thing the man had said to him in 4 years, and which Donovan appreciated. He moved to a consulting firm. 3 years there. 18 months at a venture capital-adjacent logistics startup. then a partnership stake in a regional air cargo company, small, undercapitalized, operating out of 3 southeastern hubs. That was the one. That small, undercapitalized regional carrier was where Donovan Reed first sat in a room with people who understood immediately the kind of mind they were dealing with. Not because he told them, because he showed them, in a 50-minute presentation, exactly what was wrong with their current cost structure and exactly how to fix it with numbers that turned out, when they checked, to be precisely correct. Within 18 months, the company had turned a corner. Within 3 years, it was acquired. Donovan's stake in the acquisition turned into the kind of number that meant certain doors opened without knocking. He used those doors carefully. He didn't move to a bigger apartment, didn't buy an expensive car, didn't accumulate the visible symbols of arrival that the people around him seemed to believe were the point of it all. He had 1 suit he wore for important meetings, and 3 others he wore for regular ones, and he kept them all clean, which was a thing his mother had taught him at an age before he understood why. He invested. He built. He got a seat at one table, then another. He never forgot what it had cost to get there, and he never forgot the people who weren't at any table at all. The moment Donovan Reed became a member of the Southwest Airlines Board of Directors, he was sitting in the lobby of a law firm in Dallas. He didn't celebrate. He shook the hand that was extended to him, signed 3 documents, walked out into the afternoon heat, got into a taxi, and went back to his hotel. That night, he called his mother. He didn't tell her what had happened. He just asked how she was. She told him her hip had been bothering her, that her neighbor, Mrs. Okafor, had brought over cornbread, that the lavender soap she liked was on sale at the drugstore. He listened to all of it. "You sound different," Ruth said near the end. "Good different or bad different?" She was quiet for a moment. "Like you're somewhere new. But you're okay." "I am," he said. "I'm okay." They said goodnight. He sat in the quiet of the hotel room for a while. Then he opened his laptop and started reading every internal report the airline had sent board members in the past 18 months. He had a particular habit that the airline found unusual and the other board members found eccentric. He flew commercial. Always. Coach when he was traveling personally, first class when it was a business trip, but always on the plane. Never a private charter, never a company jet. Never a car service to the airport in a blacked-out vehicle that would insulate him from the actual experience of being a customer. He explained this exactly once in a board meeting early in his tenure, when someone asked why he didn't use the executive travel budget. "Because I need to know what it actually feels like to fly with us," he said. "And you can't know that from a report." Nobody argued. Mostly because the quarterly numbers he was able to produce about the passenger experience, drawn from his own direct observations, were more accurate than the survey data they were paying $400,000 a year to collect. 6 months before the Phoenix flight, the Internal Complaint Department circulated a report. 47 discrimination complaints. 1/4, all relating to treatment in premium cabins. The breakdown was not subtle. 39 of the 47 complaints came from passengers who identified as Black or Hispanic. 34 of the 47 involved crew-initiated incidents, where passengers with valid tickets were questioned, asked to move, or removed. The report was tagged as under review. Nobody on the board brought it to the table. Donovan read it 3 times, made notes in the margin of his printed copy, sent 1 email to the compliance department asking for the previous 4 quarters of comparable data. The data came back. It wasn't an anomaly. It was a pattern. A pattern that had been in the data for years unaddressed, because nobody had wanted to see it as a pattern. It was easier to see each incident as isolated. An individual crew member having a bad day. A misunderstanding that got out of hand. The kind of thing that happens when you have 30,000 employees and things are complicated. Except when you stack them side by side, they weren't complicated at all. They were a clear line. Donovan sat on that data for 3 weeks. He considered the formal route, bringing it to the full board, scheduling a committee review, going through the machinery. The machinery was slow. The machinery would produce a task force. The task force would produce a recommendation. The recommendation would produce a pilot program. The pilot program would produce another report. 18 months later, the pattern would still be there, and 47 more people would have been asked to prove they belonged in a seat they'd already paid for. He booked his own ticket instead. Phoenix to Dallas. Flight 2847, first class, seat 4A. He paid full price. He told nobody. No assistant, no legal team on alert, no corporate security advance team. He brought his leather briefcase, his newspaper, and the internal complaint report, and he boarded the plane. He was 12 minutes into sitting in his seat when Leanne Crawford told him to get up. He hadn't been surprised. That was the part that stayed with him later. Not the anger, not the humiliation, but the absence of surprise. Like some part of him had known this was coming, because some part of him had always known this was possible. Would always be possible. The specifics were different. The location was different. The decade was different. But the woman at the front of the aisle, with the platinum hair and the flat eyes, and the absolute certainty that he did not belong in the place he had paid to be, he had met her before. On a bus in Vine City when he was 7 years old. He stayed in his seat. He checked his watch. He waited. Phoenix Sky Harbor International Airport at 5:47 in the morning had a particular quality that Donovan Reed had always found clarifying. It was the hour before the chaos. The terminal was not empty, airports were never empty, but the crowd was thin enough that you could hear individual sounds. The roll of wheels on polished floor, the distant hum of the baggage claim, the soft automatic doors opening and closing somewhere down the concourse. The fluorescent lights had that early morning quality, too bright, a little relentless, the kind of light that showed everything exactly as it was, without any of the flattery of afternoon. Donovan moved through the terminal without hurrying. He was dressed simply. Dark navy suit, no tie, the jacket hanging well because it was made well, and had been cleaned and pressed by someone who knew what they were doing. His shoes were black and clean, but not new. His leather briefcase brown, the color deepened to a rich saddle color from years of handling, was the same one he'd bought in 2009. The week after he closed his first real investment deal. It had outlasted 3 laptops and 2 cell phones, and it would probably outlast a 4th. He didn't have an assistant with him. He had told no one where he was going. His phone was on. His legal team's contact was saved as a text draft he hadn't yet sent. Just the word, ready. He hadn't sent it. He passed the newsstand and bought a copy of the Wall Street Journal, paid in cash, folded it under his arm, found the gate. The gate area was maybe half full. Business travelers in various states of alertness. A family near the window with a toddler who had found something fascinating about the carpet. A man in a baseball cap asleep across 2 chairs with his mouth slightly open. Donovan found a seat and sat. He observed. This was a habit that had never fully left him. The habit of watching how a space worked when people didn't know they were being watched. The gate agent was handling a question from an older woman about her carry-on. She was patient, efficient, genuinely pleasant. The real kind, not the performed kind. That was a good sign. But Donovan had been in this industry long enough to know that the gate was one thing and the aircraft was another. Boarding was called. He waited until the second group was almost through before he stood. He liked this part, the time when the rush had thinned and the jetway wasn't crowded. He had no reason to hurry. He had a reserved seat. It would still be there. He stepped onto the plane. The cabin was filling. Economy passengers stowing bags jostling in the aisle. He moved forward into first class, found his row, found his seat. 4A window. He settled in, folded the briefcase under the seat in front of him, unfolded the newspaper, opened it to the business section. The seat next to him, 4B, was empty. The row across from him was filling. A man in his 60s in a gray suit was already on his phone, speaking in the clipped, efficient tones of someone who spent most of his day on calls and had learned to pack meaning into as few words as possible. Donovan noted the row numbers as the first-class passengers settled. He noted the faces. He had a habit of doing this on every flight he took, not out of suspicion, but out of practice. He was interested in people, always had been. He went back to his newspaper. He didn't look up when Leanne Crawford came aboard. He didn't notice her at first. She moved through the first-class cabin doing the pre-flight ritual, checking overhead bins, straightening the galley, confirming head count with the practiced efficiency of someone who had done this routine more than 10,000 times. Then she stopped. He felt it before he saw it. The change in the energy near his seat. The slight pause in the flow of movement that breaks the rhythm when something has caught someone's attention. He kept reading. She was looking at him. He knew it. He didn't look up. He was good at this, at continuing to do the normal thing while being watched, because being watched was something he had been doing since he was a child, and you developed over time the ability to absorb it without reaction. He turned a page. He was 12 minutes into sitting in that seat when she spoke. The radio call from Southwest Operations had stopped Hallowell mid-stride. Now he stood at the front of first class with the device still in his hand, and his face had taken on the expression of a man who had just been handed information he wasn't sure how to hold. He looked at Leanne. He looked at Donovan. He looked at the radio. Leanne read his expression and stepped close. "Captain, whatever that was about, we need to resolve this situation before we become the most famous canceled flight in the country. I've done nothing wrong. He is an unauthorized—" "The ticket is valid," Hallowell said quietly. "Captain." "The ticket is valid, Leanne. I checked it myself. The reservation system flagged nothing. His card is real." He stopped, lowered his voice further. "Operations just told me to stand down. Those were the exact words. Stand down." For the first time, something moved behind Leanne Crawford's eyes that wasn't certainty. She had been certain from the moment she saw him. She had been certain when she demanded his ticket when she called the captain, when she made the statements that Emma Tran's live stream had captured with pristine audio. She had built certainty around herself like a structure, and the first crack in it appeared now, not because she was wrong, but because she was starting to understand that being right in her own mind and being protected in the real world were two different things. She chose not to show it. "I need security to escort this man from the aircraft," she said. "If operations wants to override that decision, they can do it in writing. I am responsible for the safety of this cabin." "Leanne." "Captain, call security." Hallowell looked at Donovan one more time. Donovan was reading his newspaper. He appeared to be at the commodities section. He turned a page. Hallowell keyed the radio. 2 airport security officers came aboard 12 minutes later. Officer Troy Baxter, mid-40s, heavyset, the kind of man who moved with the unhurried confidence of someone who had never once had a situation escalate past his ability to control it. Officer Dina Osei, early 30s, sharper. She scanned the cabin in one smooth pass and noted immediately the 9 phones and the live stream and the kind of silence that meant everyone was watching and had been watching for a while. Baxter didn't notice the phones. That would matter later. "What's the situation?" Baxter asked Leanne. Leanne pointed. "Unauthorized passenger in seat 4A. Won't deplane voluntarily. Potentially dangerous." "Potentially dangerous?" Donovan said from behind his newspaper without looking up. "He's been making threatening statements. I asked your captain how many times he'd asked a white passenger to prove his first-class ticket was real," Donovan said, still not looking up. "That's the threatening statement, that question." He couldn't answer it. Baxter's eyes moved to Hallowell. Hallowell said nothing. Dina Osei looked at the phones, looked at the live stream counter that Emma Tran hadn't bothered to hide, looked at Donovan, looked at Leanne. She processed things faster than Baxter. "Sir," Baxter said to Donovan, the standard opening, the procedural tone, "I'm going to need you to stand up and come with us." "No," Donovan said. "Sir, my ticket is valid. I confirmed this with the captain. Your operations center has already radioed the captain with instructions to stand down. I'm not going anywhere." He finally lowered the newspaper and looked directly at Baxter. "Officer, I'm going to ask you a question, and I want you to think carefully before you answer it. In your time doing security work, how many times have you been called to physically remove a first-class passenger who was sitting quietly in their seat, not arguing, not threatening anyone, not violating any regulation, You can cite simply because a crew member decided they didn't like the look of them. Baxter opened his mouth, closed it. Dina Osei put one hand lightly on Baxter's arm, the lightest possible touch, a signal between professionals. Baxter heard it. He didn't proceed. Leanne turned to Hallowell, something urgent and frightened moving across her face now. "Captain, you have authority over this aircraft. Use it. I have been professional. I have followed every protocol. This man is interfering with—" "He hasn't moved," someone said. It came from the rows behind first class. A man's voice measured, not aggressive. The kind of voice that says something quietly because it needs to be said, and not because it needs to be heard. A beat of silence. Then a woman in row 6. "He's been completely calm this whole time." Leanne turned. The whole cabin had been listening. Of course the whole cabin had been listening. The walls between first class and economy were not walls at all. They were curtains, and curtains don't stop sound. Emma Tran's live stream counter climbed past 67,000. On the screen of her phone, the comment feed was moving so fast it was almost unreadable. But one phrase kept appearing in different forms typed by different people in different cities who were all watching the same man sit in the same seat and not move. "Don't touch him. Don't touch him. Don't you dare touch him." Hallowell stepped forward. He stopped in front of Donovan's seat. He stood there for a moment. The silence in the cabin was complete now. Even the man in 3A who'd been on his phone had put it down. Even the flight attendant who'd been finishing the galley prep had gone still. Hallowell said quietly just to Donovan, "Sir, who are you?" It was the real question. Not the procedural one, not the legal one. The real one. Said by a man who had spent 23 years being confident about how he read a situation, and who was now standing in the wreckage of that confidence, trying to understand what had just happened. Donovan reached into his briefcase, slowly, deliberately, making sure everyone who was watching could see every movement clearly. He produced a leather document folder, dark navy, almost black, small embossed logo at the bottom corner. He opened it. He removed a single business card. He held it out toward Hallowell between 2 fingers. Hallowell took it. He read it. He read it again. The color left his face in stages, not all at once, like something draining out slowly through a crack at the bottom. He handed the card to Dina Osei. She read it. Officer Baxter, standing next to her, tried to read it over her shoulder. His restraints were still in his hands. He let them fall to his sides. Leanne had not been able to see the card from where she was standing. She saw faces, though. She saw Hallowell go pale. She saw Dina Osei's expression reset itself completely, as if she had been running one program and had just switched to another entirely. She saw Baxter, who had been leaning slightly forward like a man ready to act, settle back onto his heels. She walked the 3 steps forward and read the card over Hallowell's shoulder. The letters were clear, simple font, no decoration. Donovan Reed, Member Board of Directors, Southwest Airlines. She stared at it for a full 3 seconds. Then she said quietly, but not quietly enough, "That can't be right. Board members don't fly commercial." "I fly commercial every week," Donovan said. The flatness of it landed like a stone. "This is—" She stopped, started again. Her voice was finding new registers, moving between anger and something underneath the anger that she hadn't allowed herself to feel until this exact moment. "This is some kind of setup. You're recording this. You came on here specifically to—" "I came on here to fly to Dallas," Donovan said. "That's what the ticket says. That's what I intended to do when I sat down 47 minutes ago. Your crew members' behavior is what turned a routine flight into a national news event. 67,000 people were watching." Hallowell found his radio. He pressed the call button with a hand that was not entirely steady. Static. Then a voice, not the operations center voice from before. A different voice. Older. More authoritative. "Captain Hallowell, this is Patricia Rollins, Executive Vice President of Operations. We are aware of the situation on Flight 2847. I am directing you to take no further action regarding the passenger in seat 4A. No further action. The executive team is handling this directly. Is that understood? Yes, ma'am, Hallowell said. Is the passenger unharmed? Yes. Good. I will need a full incident report on my desk within 6 hours of landing. And Captain, before you do anything else on that aircraft today, I want you to look very carefully at the business card you are currently holding. Hallowell looked at the card in his hand. The name on that card is the reason your operations center is monitoring your flight in real time. The name on that card is the reason I am personally on this call. Is that clear? There was a pause. Yes, ma'am, Hallowell said, quieter this time. The line went still. The cabin remained absolutely motionless. 147 passengers, 9 active recording devices, an executive vice president on a radio call, 2 security officers who were no longer sure what they were supposed to be doing, and a captain holding a business card that had turned his professional world upside down in the space of 90 seconds. Leanne Crawford stood at the front of first class. She had been certain this morning. She had been certain when she'd boarded. She had been certain with every statement she'd made, every accusation she'd delivered, every time she'd said people like him, and he doesn't belong here, in a tone that assumed the world would agree with her. The world had been watching. 67,000 of it live, and she understood now, with a clarity that had the quality of ice water, that she had not been speaking her private thoughts. She had been making a statement on camera in front of witnesses about a man who had been sitting quietly in a seat he'd paid for. A man who, it turned out, was not just a passenger. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. She didn't look at it. She already knew. The cabin was still silent when Donovan finally spoke. He was not looking at Leanne. He was looking out the window at the tarmac, at the ground crews in their yellow vests moving between aircraft in the pale early morning light, at the unremarkable functional reality of an airport doing its job, planes, loaded planes, fueled planes, departing on schedule, the machinery of movement that 100,000 decisions had built over decades. He said, without turning his head, "We're already 40 minutes behind departure." His voice was completely even. "I suggest we get moving." It was Dina Osei who moved first. She took one clean step back from the row, tucked her restraints into the holder at her belt, looked at Baxter. He followed her lead, no words needed between them. They walked off the aircraft. No drama, no explanation given to the cabin. They simply left, and the closing of the aircraft door behind them had a particular finality to it. Hallowell stood at the front of first class. He looked like a man who was working hard at something internal, some recalibration of understanding that was happening behind his eyes, while his face tried to stay professional. "Captain," Donovan said, still at the window, "you'll want to brief your co-pilot on the delay." "Yes," Hallowell said. "Yes, I will." He didn't move immediately. Then, "Sir, we'll talk on the flight," Donovan said. "There's time." Hallowell went back to the cockpit. The galley curtain moved. Leanne Crawford had not left the front of first class. She stood there in the specific stillness of someone who understood that whatever she did next was also being recorded, and that every option available to her was worse than the one before. She could walk off the aircraft. She could stay. She could say something. She could stay quiet. There was no version of this where she came out unscathed. She knew that. She had known it the moment Hallowell read the card. The only variables remaining were about degree and direction. She stayed, picked up the drink service tray, returned to her routine with the careful, deliberate movements of someone doing the only thing left available to them, their job. Emma Tran in row 6 slowly lowered her phone. Her live stream counter read 91,400. The comments were still moving faster than she could read them. She had stopped trying to keep up. She sat back in her seat and looked at the front of the cabin and felt the particular weight of having witnessed something that was going to live beyond this moment for a long time. The man in seat 4A had picked up his newspaper. He was reading again, or he appeared to be, but his eyes were still, not moving across the page, looking at it but not taking it in. Whatever was happening behind those eyes was not the financial section of the Wall Street Journal. The businessman across the aisle looked at Donovan, then looked away, then looked back. "Are you all right?" he said, quietly. An ordinary question in an extraordinary moment. Donovan turned from the window. "Yes," he said. "Thank you." Simple, clean, no performance of relief or triumph, just a tired kind of steadiness that was more honest than either would have been. The plane began to move, 39 minutes behind schedule. As the aircraft pushed back from the gate and the terminal began to drift past the window, Donovan folded the newspaper across his knee, and for the first time since he had boarded the aircraft, he let himself be still in a way that wasn't strategic. Not composed, just still. Out the window, the sky above Phoenix was doing what the sky over Phoenix did in the early morning, turning from the dark purple edge of night into something between pink and gold. The mountains in the distance catching the first real light of the day. The 7 words his mother had said to him on a bus in Vine City when he was 7 years old, and a woman in a cream blazer had asked them to move. Those 7 words had traveled with him for 31 years. He had not needed to say them today. He had simply lived them. The wheels lifted. The ground fell away. They were airborne for 20 minutes when Hallowell came out of the cockpit. He walked the length of first class, slowly nodding to a couple of passengers who looked at him, and stopped at row 4. He crouched down so he was at eye level with Donovan's seat, rather than standing over it. A deliberate choice. "Can I sit for a moment?" he said, gesturing toward the empty 4B. Donovan folded his newspaper. Of course. Hallowell sat. He looked straight ahead for a moment at the seat back in front of him, then turned to Donovan. "I need to tell you something," he said. "Not as a captain, just as a man." "Go ahead." "When I came out of that cockpit this morning, I had already decided you were the problem. Not because I had evidence, because Leanne told me there was a problem, and I trusted her red over yours. And I trusted hers over yours before I had spoken a single word to you." Donovan said nothing. "I've been flying for 23 years, Hallowell continued. "I've handled real situations, real threatening passengers, real security events. I know what those look like, and you didn't look like that. But I kept—" He stopped, pressed his mouth flat. "I kept finding ways to justify what Leanne was saying, even when the ticket was right, even when the card checked out, even when you answered every question without raising your voice once." "Why?" Donovan said. "That's what I'm trying to figure out." Outside the window, they were above the clouds. The altitude had that particular morning clarity, vast and blue and clean, completely indifferent to what was happening inside the metal tube passing through it. "My radio went to the executive level," Hallowell said. "That means somebody at the top of this company was watching that live stream in real time. That means somebody knew something I didn't. And whatever's on that business card," he nodded toward Donovan's jacket pocket, "it sent Patricia Rollins onto the radio herself. I've been flying for Southwest for 11 years. I have never once spoken directly to Patricia Rollins." "You have now," Donovan said. Hallowell looked at him. "The card said board member," Hallowell said carefully. "But the VP called you by your first name, and the way she said the name on that card is why I'm personally on this call." He stopped. "The card wasn't the whole picture, was it?" Donovan reached into the inner pocket of his jacket. He produced a second card. Not the one he'd handed Baxter. This one was slightly different. He held it out. Hallowell took it. He read it. He sat with it for a full 10 seconds before he said anything. His voice, when it came, was very quiet. "Chairman, you're the chairman of the board." "Yes." "Of this airline." "Yes." Hallowell set the card on his knee, looked at the back of the seat in front of him. In the rows behind them, the cabin had the normal low hum of a flight in progress. Conversation headphones, the soft ping of seatbelt signs. Nobody in economy knew what was happening at row 4. Nobody in first class was pretending not to listen. The man in 3A had his phone out. Not to call anyone. He was looking at it the way people look at a screen when they need somewhere to put their eyes while their mind is somewhere else. "Why didn't you tell us?" Hallowell said finally. "When it started, why not just say who you were?" Because no one asked. We asked for your ticket. We asked for ID. You asked for proof that my ticket was real. Not who I was. My ticket was real. That should have been enough. Donovan paused. When you walk up to a white passenger sitting quietly in a business class seat, do you ask them to prove who they are before you accept their ticket? Hallowell didn't answer. He knew the answer. 47 complaints, Captain. Last quarter. Passengers who were questioned, delayed, removed, or humiliated while sitting in seats they had validly purchased. 39 of them were Black or Hispanic. 34 of the incidents were initiated by crew without any behavior from the passenger that justified escalation. Donovan kept his voice level, not reciting to wound, stating facts because facts were what he had. I didn't tell you who I was because I wanted to know what this airline looks like when it thinks nobody's watching. Now I know. Hallowell was quiet for a long time. Outside, cloud formations moved past the window in slow, enormous shapes. What happens now? He said. To you. To all of us. Donovan looked at him directly, steady. That depends on what happens next. Not today. After today. He picked up his newspaper. The conversation was over. But Hallowell sat in 4B for 3 more minutes before he stood up. He didn't speak. He just sat. Like a man who had somewhere to be and needed one more moment before he was ready to go there. Then he went back to the cockpit. They were 2 hours into the flight when Leanne Crawford walked to row 4. She didn't carry anything. No drink, no tray, no service item to use as cover. She came with nothing in her hands, which was unusual for a flight attendant during a flight, and which meant something. She stopped at the aisle seat. Donovan was looking out the window. "Can I sit?" she said. A long pause. "Yes," Donovan said. She sat in 4B. Hallowell had been the last person to sit there. She folded her hands in her lap. Her blonde hair had come loose slightly at one temple, not messily, just showing the effort it had taken to keep it together under the pressure of the morning. She didn't speak immediately, neither did he. Then she said, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to know that I'm not asking to get something from you. I'm asking because I need to understand something." He turned from the window. She was looking straight ahead, not at him, at the seat back in front of her. "How many times has this happened to you? Not on a plane specifically, just this. Someone deciding before you open your mouth that you don't belong somewhere." Donovan looked at her for a moment. Then he said, "Do you want a number or do you want the truth?" "The truth." He was quiet for a moment. Outside, the sky was an even deep blue. The altitude had that quality of silence, the sound-absorbing quality of distance from the ground, from streets, from all the noise that collected down there. "I was 7 years old on a bus in Atlanta," he said. "A woman asked my mother to move. My mother moved. She didn't argue. She just picked up her bag and took my hand and moved us to the back, and she said 7 words to me when we sat down. And I have thought about those 7 words every time someone has decided I don't belong somewhere." He paused. "I stopped counting the times around 30. I was 31 when I stopped. I'm 51 now." Leanne said nothing. The man who was turned away from the exhibition hall. The graduate student asked if he was sure he was in the right department. The contractor denied a contract with work that was better than the next bidders. The passenger asked to move from a seat he purchased. Donovan's voice stayed level. "There is no number. It is a pattern built into the structure of how things work. Not always with bad intent. Sometimes with none at all. Just assumption. The assumption that I don't quite fit the picture of someone who should be here." Leanne was crying. It had happened quietly, without drama, the way grief sometimes comes when it's been held back long enough. Not a performance, but a release. Something that had been pressing against the inside of the morning since the moment she read that card and understood what she had done. She didn't try to stop it or explain it. "I believed it," she said. "I believed it completely. I saw you sit down, and I believed it immediately before I had a single fact, and I built the entire story from there." "I know," Donovan said. "I've said things on camera that She stopped. I can't take those back. No. My career is over. Probably. She looked at him. The directness of it surprised her. Not cruelty, just the refusal to soften something that was true and that she already knew. The 47 people in that complaint report, Donovan said. Some of them missed important flights. Some of them were humiliated in front of their families. Some of them sat in a seat like this one. He touched the armrest and felt something I'm very familiar with. The specific feeling of having your right to be somewhere denied before you've done a single thing to deserve it. Leanne listened. They didn't have board seats. They didn't have legal teams. They didn't have 30 years of preparation and a company history that happened to intersect with the company that humiliated them. They had a ticket, and they had their dignity, and someone took one of those two things from them. She wiped her face with the back of her hand. What do you want from me? She said. Nothing, Donovan said. I want you to understand what happened this morning. Not what you did to me, that part I'm fine. I want you to understand what this morning looked like for the 47 people who didn't have a business card to play. Because if you understand that, he stopped, looked out the window. If you understand that what you do with it from here is up to you. She sat for another minute. Then she stood up, smoothed her uniform jacket, walked to the galley. Donovan watched a cloud pass below the wing. He thought about his mother on that bus, her small hands gathering the bag. The way she had not looked back at the woman in the cream blazer. The 7 words she had said low and steady into his ear. He thought about what she would say if she could see him now. He thought she would have something dry and warm and honest to say about all of it. He almost smiled. He went back to his newspaper. The announcement came over the intercom in Hallowell's voice. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be beginning our descent into Dallas-Fort Worth shortly. Local time is 11:08 a.m. Temperature on the ground is 82 degrees. On behalf of Southwest Airlines and the entire crew, we thank you for your patience today. We are running 38 minutes behind schedule. He didn't explain why. He didn't need to. The 147 passengers in economy had largely figured it out through the slow osmosis of overheard conversation and the particular energy that moves through a cabin when something unusual has happened. By the time they were past El Paso, the story had spread, row by row, from front to back, in the way that stories always travel in enclosed spaces inaccurately, but faster than the truth. In first class, the energy was different, quieter, more specific, the kind of silence that belongs to people who were in the room. The businessman from 3A had put his phone away an hour ago, and had spent the remainder of the flight staring out the window with the expression of someone rearranging his understanding of something. The couple from 5C had stopped their conversation entirely after Donovan spoke to Leanne, and had remained in their separate silences since. The teenager in 6B had stopped filming sometime around the second hour, and had just watched in the way teenagers sometimes watch things, when they understand they are seeing something that matters. Emma Tran had closed her live stream. The total view count when she ended it had been 112,000 concurrent. The clip had been shared on 12 platforms before the flight touched the ground. She had 311 notifications she hadn't opened. She sat with her notebook open in her lap, writing, not on her phone, by hand, the old way, filling the narrow lines with the specifics of what she had witnessed, every word and sequence and silence she could remember while it was still sharp. On the page she wrote, "He never once raised his voice, not once. 12 minutes of direct provocation, and he never gave them a single thing to use against him." Then she circled it. As the aircraft descended and the Dallas sprawl came into view below flat and enormous, the geometric grids of suburbs stretching to every horizon, Donovan Reed folded his newspaper one final time. He placed it in the seat pocket in front of him. He reached under the seat and checked the briefcase handle. He buttoned the middle button of his jacket. He was ready to land. The wheels came down. The airport appeared beneath them. The touchdown was smooth. Hallowell's landing, whatever else the morning had been, he was still an excellent pilot, and had always been. The aircraft rolled down the runway and slowed and turned and pulled toward the gate. The seatbelt sign chimed off. The overhead bins opened in the first-class cabin with the usual chorus of clicks. People stood, reached, gathered their things. The ordinary choreography of landing. Donovan stood, retrieved his briefcase, settled his jacket. He was the third person to deplane. At the front of the cabin, Leanne Crawford stood at the door in the standard position, hands clasped, back straight, uniform still correct in every visible detail. She was doing her job. She would do it until the last passenger was off the aircraft because that was what the job required, and she knew no other way to be. Donovan walked toward the door. He slowed slightly as he passed her. She met his eyes. He didn't say anything to her. She didn't say anything to him. There was nothing left between them that required words. Just the fact of what had happened held in the space between two people who had both been changed by it in ways they couldn't yet fully see. He stepped through the door and into the jet bridge. The air in the tunnel was warm and stale in the way jet bridges always are, that particular in-between air, neither inside nor outside the transitional air of arrivals. At the end of the jet bridge where the terminal began, a Federal Aviation Authority inspector, 2 Southwest HR representatives, and Donovan's legal team, who had received a 2-word text at 9:47 a.m. It's time. They fell into step around him without ceremony. Donovan walked into the terminal. He didn't look back at the aircraft. Behind him, Leanne Crawford stood at the aircraft door and watched the last few economy passengers file past. When the last one was through, she stepped back inside the empty cabin. The seats were scattered with the debris of a full flight, cups, wrappers, a child's sock. Someone had lost a magazine left face down on an armrest. She stood at row 4. She looked at seat 4A. The newspaper he had been reading was still in the seat pocket. She reached in and took it out. She held it for a moment, this ordinary object, this thing that a man had carried onto a plane and read calmly for 12 minutes while someone tried to take his seat out from under him. Then she folded it carefully along its original crease and put it back. She walked to the galley. She started the cleanup. This part happened on the flight, in the second hour, in the space between the moment Hallowell came out of the cockpit and the moment Leanne Crawford came to row 4. It didn't make the live stream. Nobody filmed it. It was just 2 men at altitude, one of them holding a business card that had rearranged his understanding of the past 40 minutes. Hallowell sat in 4B with the second card still on his knee. He'd read it 3 times. The words weren't getting simpler. Chairman, Board of Directors. The most senior non-executive position in the governance structure of the company he had flown for 11 years. "I want to ask you something," Hallowell said. "And I want to be honest with you. I don't know if I'm going to like the answer." "Go ahead," Donovan said. "When you flew this morning, knowing what you knew about the complaint data, were you hoping something like this would happen?" Donovan looked at him steadily. "I was prepared for it," he said. "That's different." "Is it? Hoping for something means you want it to occur. I didn't want any of this to occur. I wanted to fly to Dallas and read my newspaper. What I was prepared for was the possibility, the real possibility, given what the data showed, that I would not be allowed to do that. That the same pattern that had been documented in 47 cases would happen to me on a routine Tuesday morning." He paused. "I was prepared. I wasn't hoping." Hallowell was quiet. He looked at the seat back. "When I came out of that cockpit, I had already decided. I know. Before I spoke to you, before I even looked at your ticket. I know that too." "How?" Donovan considered the question. "Because I've been in that position before, on the other side of it. You walk toward my row with a specific kind of purposefulness that doesn't come from neutrality. You were walking toward a problem that Leanne had already defined for you, and you trusted her definition." He stopped. "That's not a character flaw. It's what happens when you trust someone over a long period of time without ever examining what that trust is actually based on." Hallowell absorbed this. 8 years she's been flying with me," he said. "I've never had reason to. Has she been in a situation like this before?" "Not that I." He stopped. "There have been incidents, over the years, complaints about her manner with certain passengers. I dealt with them at the time. They seemed resolved. He stopped again. Donovan waited. I accepted her explanations, Hallowell said. Every time. I never sat with the pattern of it. No, Donovan said. You didn't. The word landed without cruelty, just accuracy. The same quality as a number in a column that adds up to what it adds up to, regardless of whether you want it to. Hallowell looked out the window. The cloud formations below them had the quality of a landscape, vast and white, and geographically complete with their own ridges and valleys and depth. Flying above clouds always did something to Hallowell's sense of proportion. Made the things below seem less fixed than they usually felt. 23 years, he said, and I'm sitting here realizing I don't know how many times I've made that same call. Trusting one person's read over another's. Seeing a situation through someone else's eyes without questioning whose eyes I was borrowing. Most people don't question it, Donovan said. The pattern becomes invisible when you're inside it. That's not an excuse. No, Donovan agreed. It isn't. It's an explanation. Those are different. Hallowell looked at him. What's the difference? An excuse ends the conversation. An explanation starts it. A long silence. Outside, the clouds moved in their enormous, slow way. My son, Hallowell said. Not as a continuation of the conversation exactly, more like something that had been waiting to come out since the moment he'd read the second card. He's 12. He's mixed race. His mother is Haitian. Hallowell stopped. He looks like the world, you know what I mean. He could be from anywhere. He has this face that's just... He made a small, helpless gesture. He's 12, and I'm sitting here thinking about what the next 30 years look like for him. Whether he's going to sit in a first-class seat someday and have someone decide before he opens his mouth that he doesn't belong there. Donovan said nothing. And the person doing that to him might be exactly like me, Hallowell said. Following someone else's read, not asking the questions, trusting the wrong thing. The plane moved through the sky in its constant, steady way. I don't know what I'm supposed to do with that, Hallowell said. I think you already know, Donovan said. Hallowell looked at him. Start with the questions you didn't ask today, Donovan said. And ask them next time. That's where it starts. Not in a training room. In the moment before you make the call. Hallowell nodded. He sat in 4B for another 3 minutes. Then he went back to the cockpit. This has been told partially before, but the part that matters most happens after Leanne cries. After she wipes her face and asks what he wants from her. After he says nothing. There is a moment, 10 seconds, maybe 15, where she sits in 4B and looks at her hands. Her platinum-blonde hair is half out of the cap now. The careful professional presentation of the morning dissolved by the hours and the altitude, and what has happened in between. She says, I don't know who I was this morning. Donovan looks at her, considers the statement. I think you do, he says. That's the harder thing to carry. She doesn't react defensively. She knows he's right. She has been knowing it since somewhere over New Mexico when the cabin went quiet and the anger started to drain out of the certainty, and what was underneath it, less comfortable, less named, began to surface. I've been flying for 8 years, she says. I've seen a lot of passengers. I thought I was... She stops. I thought I was good at this, reading people, knowing who meant trouble and who didn't. And I couldn't read you, not because you were difficult, because you were... She is struggling with the word. You were just a man on a plane reading a newspaper. There was nothing wrong. There was nothing off. But something in my head said there was before I checked any fact, and I built everything from there. Yes, Donovan says. Where does that come from? The question is genuine, not rhetorical, not defensive. She actually wants to know. Donovan thinks for a moment. From the same place every other assumption comes from, he says. From what you've absorbed. From what's been reinforced over time without ever being examined. From a picture in your mind of what belongs where built from 1,000 small pieces you didn't choose and may not even remember taking in. He pauses. It's built into the structure of things, not in you specifically, in what surrounds you. But you have to choose what to do with it when you find it. She nods, very slowly. And today, she says, I chose the wrong thing. Yes. I don't know how to... She stops. You don't have to figure that out right now, he says. That's a long conversation with yourself, not with me. She looks at him for the first time directly in the whole exchange. Not the look from the front of the cabin, not the look of someone asserting authority or demanding compliance. Just a person looking at another person. I'm sorry, she says. Donovan is quiet for a moment. I know, he says. He doesn't say it's okay. It isn't entirely okay, and both of them know that. The 47 complaint reports aren't okay. The passengers who didn't have a board seat and still deserve to keep theirs aren't okay. The moment this morning on the live stream isn't okay in the sense of erased or resolved. But her apology is real, and real apologies deserve to be received even when they don't fix everything. He receives it. He says, there is someone I want you to know about. Not me, someone from the complaint report. He opens his briefcase, finds the document, finds one page, holds it so she can read a single paragraph without him handing it to her. She leans in, reads. A retired school teacher, 63 years old, traveling to see her daughter's graduation. Placed in first class as an anniversary gift from her husband, who had saved for 2 years to pay for the upgrade. Removed from her seat by a crew member who told her the seat was incorrectly assigned, a statement that proved when checked to be false. Missed the graduation. Filed a complaint. Received a form letter acknowledging her feedback. Leanne reads it twice. She doesn't say anything. Donovan closes the folder. She doesn't know my name, he says. She never will. But she was sitting in a seat exactly like this one, and nobody was filming. He pauses. That's the story that matters, not mine. Leanne stands up. She goes back to the galley. She does not look at the seat as she passes. But Donovan can see in the set of her shoulders that something has shifted. Not resolved, not fixed, but moved. Something that had been standing perfectly rigid has given slightly the way a structure gives when pressure is finally applied from the right direction. What she does with that shift is not his to control. He has said what he came to say. He goes back to the window. Emma Tran came forward from row 6 between the Leanne conversation and the descent announcement. She stood at the end of the row, not hovering, not eager, just there waiting to see if he would look up. He did. She said, I know you probably don't want to talk to a journalist right now. Probably not, he agreed. I'm not going to ask for an interview. He looked at her for a moment. She was slight and young, and had the particular quality of someone who thought carefully before speaking. The way the words came out, measured and considered, not because she was slow, but because she had already processed several things by the time she said one of them. Then what are you going to ask for? He said. I have been doing this kind of work for 3 years, she said. Freelance mostly. I cover situations where something has happened that people with power would prefer to handle quietly. I was on this flight by accident. I had no idea what I was going to see when I pressed live this morning. She stopped. But I know that the clip is already everywhere. And I know that the story people are going to tell about this is the story of the chairman of Southwest Airlines being treated badly. Because that's a satisfying story. Powerful man vindicated. The end. Donovan said nothing. And I think that's the wrong story, she said. He looked at her with slightly more attention now, the kind of attention that isn't just polite. I think the right story is the 47 people who came before you and didn't have anything, she said. And I think if I write that story without the right... She paused, choosing the word. Without the right starting point, it'll be read once and forgotten. But if I can find the right person to point me toward the actual people in that report... Donovan reached into his briefcase. He took out the legal pad he had used for notes. He wrote a name, an Atlanta area code, and a phone number. He tore the page along the edge, held it out. Emma took it. She looked at what was written. Claudette Morgan, Civil Rights Law Center, Atlanta. She has the full complaint data, Donovan said. She's been waiting for this moment for a while. Tell her you got her name from a passenger on flight 2847. She'll know what that means. Emma folded the paper carefully. What's the story you want told? She asked. He thought about it. Not mine, he said. Mine ends well. I got to keep my seat. Not everyone did. She nodded. She went back to row 6. She did not open her live stream again for the rest of the flight. Instead, she wrote 3 pages of handwritten notes while the plane descended toward Dallas. She wrote about the 12 minutes. She wrote about the silence after he doesn't belong here. She wrote about the way a man sits when he has decided that nothing anyone says is going to move him from a place he has the right to be. She drew a small asterisk at the top of the first page and wrote beside it, "The story is not about him. Remember that." She underlined it. Then she kept writing. The wheels touched the runway with the small, dense sound that always felt both ordinary and remarkable, the reunion of machine and earth after the long-held breath of flight. The aircraft slowed. In first class, the collective exhale was almost audible. Not relief exactly, something more like completion, the way a room releases tension when a long silence finally ends. The intercom chimed. Hallowell's voice came through careful and level. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport. Local time is 11:23 a.m. On behalf of Southwest Airlines, I want to thank you for your patience on what has been an unusual morning. We hope you'll allow us the chance to do better. The slight hesitation before do better was not something most passengers would notice. The people in first class noticed. The plane turned at the end of the runway and taxied toward the gate. The familiar choreography of arrival, the gradual slowing, the turn, the gate coming into view through the windows, the soft thump of the jetway connecting. The seatbelt sign chimed off. Overhead bins opened in their cascade of small clicks. People stood, reached, gathered. Donovan was methodical. He retrieved his briefcase. He straightened his jacket. He waited for the aisle to clear slightly before stepping out of 4A. He was the third person to deplane. At the door, Leanne Crawford stood in her standard position, hands clasped, uniform correct. Doing her job because that was what the job required, and she had always found her way back to that. Donovan walked toward her. He slowed, not stopping, just a half-beat slower than his usual pace. She met his eyes. He didn't speak. She didn't speak. There was nothing that needed to be said that hadn't already been said at altitude. There was just this, 2 people standing in the doorway of a plane at the end of a morning that had changed something in both of them, and the acknowledgement of that wordless in the space between them. He stepped through the door. The jet bridge air was warm and stale and completely ordinary. At the far end of the tunnel, the terminal opened up. Donovan walked toward it at his usual pace, not hurrying, not slowing, the particular gait of a man who is going exactly where he means to go. As he emerged into the gate area, he saw them. The Federal Aviation Authority inspector, 2 Southwest HR officers, the 2 lawyers from his legal team, both standing with the composed, alert bearing of people who had received a 2-word text 2 hours ago, and had spent the intervening time preparing. They fell into formation around him without ceremony or greeting. Professional, efficient. The way people move when there's work to be done. They walked together through the terminal. Behind him, the last economy passengers were filing down the jet bridge. Some of them were on their phones telling people what they'd heard. The story was already in the air, moving faster than the plane had moved, spreading through the invisible network that stories travel through when enough people have seen something that they can't stop thinking about. 112,000 people had watched it live. Millions more were seeing the clips on their feeds. A journalist in row 6 had 300 notifications. But Donovan Reed walked through Dallas-Fort Worth without looking at his phone. He let the lawyers take the lead on pace and direction. He looked at the terminal, the coffee kiosks, and the gate desks, and the families with carry-ons, and the business travelers already back on their devices. The whole enormous, ordinary machinery of people going places. He thought about his mother. He thought about the number 3 bus. He thought about a woman in a cream blazer who had stepped off 2 stops later without looking back. He thought about seat 4A. He thought about 31 years. He thought about Ruth Reed's small hands resting on his shoulder, guiding him without words toward the back of the bus. The efficiency of the gesture. The way she had absorbed the impact and redirected the energy without letting him see the cost. He thought about the 7 words she had said. He had never told anyone what they were. He thought maybe it was time. But not today. Today, there was work to do. He walked through the terminal. He did not look back. By 6 p.m. on the day of the flight, the clip had been seen by 4 million people. Not the full live stream, the 2-minute segment that began with Leanne's voice saying, "People like him," and ended with Dina Osei's face reading the business card. That segment. Clean, contained, damning. It had been trimmed and captioned and posted by 23 separate accounts before Emma Tran's original was even featured by a major outlet. It moved the way those things move, not like a tide, but like a current appearing on screens without being searched for, finding people who hadn't gone looking for it. Donovan Reed had not posted anything. His social media accounts, modest to begin with, maintained by an assistant who understood he was not a person who performed himself publicly, had gone dark by midday. 3 scheduled posts had been quietly unpublished. He had not spoken to a single journalist. His legal team had issued 1 brief statement, 4 sentences, acknowledging that an incident had occurred and that it would be addressed through appropriate channels. No names named, no dollar figures floated, nothing that would give anyone a narrative to grab. The airline statement came 6 hours later and was worse than no statement at all. The kind of corporate language that apologizes for the experience without acknowledging what caused it. The sort of thing that a communications team produces when they are trying to find the exact center of the liability exposure and speak to that rather than to the truth. The internet made short work of it. By midnight, a counter-petition had gathered 40,000 signatures demanding that Southwest acknowledge what the video showed explicitly, not euphemistically. By 3 a.m., 3 major cable news programs had reached out to Emma Tran. She had not called them back. She had called Claudette Morgan. Donovan, at that hour, was sitting alone in a hotel room in Dallas. Not the executive suite, a standard business room on the 12th floor. He had ordered room service soup and bread and eaten it at the desk, looking at the window at the lights of the city laid out below in their vast, indifferent grid. His phone had buzzed 341 times since he landed. He had answered 4 of those calls. His legal team, Patricia Rollins at Southwest, who spoke for 40 minutes and who was Donovan had always thought one of the genuinely principled people in the company's executive layer, someone who was going to be important in what came next. His mother, who called at 9 p.m. and said simply, "I heard. Are you all right?" And he said, "Yes, Mama, I'm all right." She didn't ask for details. She trusted that he would tell her the rest when he was ready. He sat at the desk after those 4 calls and turned his phone face down and ate the rest of the soup and looked out the window. He wasn't angry. He had processed the anger somewhere over the Arizona desert, while reading the same paragraph of the financial section 6 times without absorbing it. What was left now wasn't anger. It was something more sustainable and more demanding. The specific kind of tiredness that comes not from exertion, but from having to be exactly who you are without modification or explanation in the face of people who keep deciding you are something else. He had felt that tiredness many times. He knew it wasn't the end of anything. It was what you felt when you had done the thing, and now the thing was in the world, and you had to live inside that and decide what to build from it. He ordered coffee. He opened his laptop. He began reading. The 47 complaints. He had read them before in the context of a board report as data. Now he read them again as stories, each one in full. The school teacher who missed her daughter's graduation. The surgeon asked to produce additional ID. The professor questioned 3 times about whether her seat was correct. The 67-year-old man asked to open his bag for inspection, while white passengers in adjacent seats were waved through without question. He read all 47. He closed the laptop at 2:47 a.m. He sat in the dark for a while. He thought about what he wanted to build, not what the board would vote for, not what the PR team would recommend, not what looked best in the short term in the context of a story that would be old news in 6 weeks. What he actually wanted to build. He had a yellow legal pad and a pen. He started writing. The board convened 48 hours after the flight. It was not the full quarterly meeting. It was an emergency session. 12 directors, the CEO, the general counsel, and 3 members of the external affairs team convened in a conference room at the Dallas corporate headquarters, with the particular energy that emergency board meetings carry. The tightened-up, efficient energy of people who know that every minute of equivocation is being watched from outside. Donovan sat at his usual place around the table. He had slept 4 hours. He was wearing the same dark navy suit, freshly pressed. He had a yellow legal pad in front of him and a plain cup of coffee, and the document folder he had carried onto the plane. Patricia Rollins opened the meeting. She was 54 years old, a former military logistics officer before she crossed into the private sector, with the upright bearing of someone who had learned to be clear and direct in contexts where clarity and directness were not optional. She had called Donovan the morning after the flight, not to manage the situation, but to understand it. And the 30-second phone call in which he told her to read the full complaint report, not the summary, the full report, had been one of the more important conversations of her career. "The situation is documented," she said. "The media coverage is extensive. The legal exposure is real. I'm not going to review those details because this room already knows them." She looked at Donovan. "I want to give the floor to Donovan first, before we vote on anything." Donovan stood. He did not have prepared remarks. He had the legal pad and the complaint report, and what he had been thinking about since 2:47 a.m. 2 days ago. He said, "I want to start with something that isn't on the agenda." He opened the folder. He found the single page he had shown Leanne on the plane, the retired school teacher, the graduation, the form letter. He read it aloud, slowly. The room was very quiet. Then he read another one. A 38-year-old architect traveling with his wife and their 2-year-old, asked to move from his first-class seats because a crew member believed his boarding passes were fraudulent. They weren't. He spent 40 minutes standing at the back of the aircraft while the issue was resolved. His wife stood with the toddler. No apology was issued before or after the flight. He read a third. A 62-year-old retired nurse who had been upgraded as a birthday present from her adult children. She was asked twice to confirm that the upgrade was legitimate. When she asked why she was being asked, the crew member said, "We just want to make sure there hasn't been an error." There had been no error. There never had been. Donovan set the folder down. 47 cases, he said. In 1 quarter. 39 involving passengers of color. 34 initiated by crew without any behavioral justification from the passenger. He looked around the table. This data was circulated to this board 8 weeks ago. It was tagged for review. No one brought it to the table. Silence. "I'm not here to assign blame for that," he said. "I'm here to say that what happened on Flight 2847 was not an aberration. It was the pattern made visible. And the pattern has been visible in the data for longer than 8 weeks." He sat down. The room stayed quiet for a beat. Then it got to work. The discussion that followed was one of the cleaner board conversations Donovan had witnessed in 12 years of sitting around tables like this one. Not everyone agreed on everything, but no one tried to minimize the complaint data. No one suggested waiting for the media attention to die down before making structural changes. The general counsel raised liability exposure in straightforward terms. The external affairs representatives flagged the reputational dimension clearly, without inflating it into something it wasn't. By the end of 3 hours, the board had voted on 4 specific actions. Leanne Crawford's employment was terminated effective immediately for violation of the airline's non-discrimination policy, the specific statements captured on record constituting sufficient documented cause. The vote was unanimous. Captain Greg Hallowell was suspended with pay pending investigation. The suspension was not punitive in tone. The language used in the resolution was careful and specific. There was a question about the pattern of decisions made by this officer over time, and that question required a formal review before any further determination could be made. The complaint review process was restructured. A proposal Donovan had written by hand on a legal pad between 3 a.m. and 6 a.m. and handed to Patricia Rollins that morning. The new process removed the single point of failure that had allowed 47 complaints to route through regional management and die quietly. It established an independent review committee that reported to the full board rather than to the executive chain. The final item, the airline's non-discrimination training program, which had been a voluntary module 6 years old, last updated before the pandemic, was replaced with a mandatory program, ground-up rebuild required for all cabin crew within 60 days. The meeting ended at 6:34 p.m. Donovan drove himself back to the hotel. He ordered soup again. He ate it at the desk. He did not watch the news coverage. He called his mother and told her he was still all right. She told him about the lavender soap. He listened to the whole thing. The apartment in Dallas was smaller than the one she'd had before. Not dramatically smaller. Just the kind of smaller that happens when you go from a 2-income household, she and her boyfriend of 4 years, to 1 income to no income, with the relationship changing before the job did each casualty connected to the same morning. She had not expected him to stay. She hadn't asked him to. She rented the smaller apartment in a different part of the city, closer to the transit line with a balcony that faced east and got good morning light. She had not known until she moved in that she valued good morning light. She was learning things about herself that she hadn't had occasion to learn before. She looked for work. The airline industry is not large in the way that most industries are large. It has the physical scale of enormous machinery, the planes, the airports, the global reach, but the social scale of a small town. People knew people. Hiring managers knew hiring managers. Stories moved along the grapevine before resumes did. She applied to 4 carriers. The responses were polite, 3 of them. The 4th was silence. She understood. She was not, at this point in the process, asking for sympathy about this. She had gone over the morning many times, not to torture herself, but with the honest intent of understanding each decision point. The moment she decided the ticket was fraudulent before checking. The moment she decided to say people like him in a cabin with 9 recording devices. The moment she could have stopped and didn't. She had made those choices. The consequences were the consequences. What she was less sure of was what she was supposed to do with the understanding she was building. The slow, uncomfortable understanding of the machinery that had been running underneath her certainty, the picture of the world she had assembled over 42 years. The picture that had told her the moment she saw Donovan Reed in seat 4A that something was wrong when nothing was wrong. Where did it come from? She tried to trace it. Genuinely. Not as an exercise in self-absolution, but in the spirit of the question Donovan had answered honestly on the plane. From what surrounds you, from what's been reinforced without being examined. She found things she didn't like. Not dramatic things, small things. The way she had always described certain neighborhoods versus others when giving people directions. The way she had relaxed differently around certain kinds of groups in the cabin versus others. The way professional and put together had meant in her mind a particular look that she had never consciously examined the origin of. Small things that had added up over time to the moment at row 4. She started writing about it. Not for publication, just for herself. A notebook, plain, bought at a pharmacy down the street. She wrote in it in the evenings when the apartment was quiet and the eastern sky outside her balcony had gone from pink to purple to dark. She did not write to Donovan Reed. She understood without needing to be told that his story and hers were separate from each other now. He had said what he came to say at 30,000 feet, and she had received it. The rest was her work to do. She found a community organization that provided transitional support for families in the Dallas area, logistics and transportation assistance helping people get to medical appointments and social service offices and school events. They needed a coordinator. The pay was less than she'd been earning in the air. She took the job. She was not good at it immediately. She had organizational skills, but needed to build new instincts around working with people who had different kinds of difficulty than she had managed before. She made mistakes. She learned from them. She came back the next day. One afternoon, she was helping an elderly Haitian woman navigate the transit system to get to an immigration appointment. The woman spoke no English. Leanne spoke no French Creole. They communicated through a translation app and a lot of patient demonstration. When they arrived at the appointment on time, the woman turned to Leanne and said something in Creole that the translation app rendered as, "You are very kind." Leanne didn't know what to do with that. She drove back to the office and sat in the parking lot for a few minutes. Then she went in and started on the afternoon schedule. The investigation took 6 weeks. It was handled by an independent labor attorney contracted by the board's new oversight committee, who reviewed 12 years of Hallowell's incident reports. Every passenger conflict, every removal from an aircraft, every formal complaint filed against a flight he had commanded. The results were what they were. Over 12 years, 26 passenger removals or forced seat changes in which Hallowell had either initiated or endorsed the crew's decision. 19 of those 26 involved passengers of color. The incidents were individually documented in a way that made each one look defensible in isolation. Passenger was non-compliant. Crew reported aggressive behavior. Ticket irregularity suspected. But together the pattern was clear. Not malice, exactly. The investigator used a phrase in her report that Hallowell would come back to many times: automated deference to crew bias. The pattern of trusting certain crew members' reads without question in situations where the reads consistently pointed in the same racial direction. He was cleared for return to flight duty. On conditions, mandatory completion of a rebuilt bias awareness training program, 18 months of supervised probation, and a formal evaluation at the 12-month mark. The first day of the training program was on a Wednesday morning in November in a classroom at the Dallas hub. The room had 12 people in it. Hallowell was the most senior, a mix of pilots and cabin crew, some there by requirement like him, some voluntarily. The curriculum was new. Donovan's board vote had accelerated the timeline for the rebuild. The instructor was a woman named Dr. Aisha Pemberton. She was 41 years old, a psychologist who specialized in decision-making under professional pressure. She had the particular quality of someone who was not intimidated by seniority or credentials, who looked at everyone in the room with the same direct, evaluating attention, regardless of what was on their name tag. She did not begin with a lecture. She asked them to write individually the answer to one question. The question was, describe a decision you made on the job that you were completely certain was correct in the moment. Now describe what you would need to learn that would make you uncertain about it. Hallowell sat with his pen above the paper for a long time. Then he wrote about Flight 2847. He wrote the moment he walked out of the cockpit, the moment he looked at Donovan and decided Leanne's read was right. The moment the ticket came out and he felt the card and still found himself looking for reasons to doubt. He wrote, "What I would need to learn to be uncertain about it was exactly what I learned. That the certainty was inherited, not earned. That I trusted someone else's eyes without asking what those eyes were trained to see." He handed the paper in at the end of the session. Dr. Pemberton read it on her lunch break. She set it down. She made a note in her materials, used with permission as a case study in week 4. On the day Hallowell returned to active flight duty, he arrived at the aircraft an hour before boarding. He walked the length of the plane. He checked systems. He spoke with each crew member individually, not in the group briefing, individually, and asked them how they were and what they needed to know for this flight. It was the kind of thing he had done early in his career and had gradually stopped doing as efficiency became the norm and individual attention became an inefficiency. He did it again. Before he went into the cockpit, he stopped at row 4. He stood there for a moment. Seat 4A was empty, waiting. He thought about what it looked like from 4A, looking up the aisle toward the curtain and the galley, what it felt like to sit in that seat and have the world come toward you with its mind already made up. He thought about his son. He went into the cockpit. He flew the flight. He flew it well. Claudette Morgan answered the phone on the second ring. She was 61 years old, with close-cropped silver hair and the particular telephone presence of someone who had spent 4 decades in a field where the person on the other end of the line was often in distress and needed to be received steadily. Emma Tran said, "A passenger on flight 2847 gave me your name." A pause, then, "Say that again?" "A passenger on Southwest flight 2847 yesterday. He gave me a piece of paper with your name and number. Said to tell you I got it from him, that you'd know what it meant." Silence on the line. "Yes," Claudette Morgan said. Her voice had changed. Something in it, not warmth exactly, more like recognition. The feeling of a thing that had been waited for arriving on schedule. "Yes, I know what it means." Claudette Morgan had been running the Civil Rights Law Center in Atlanta for 17 years. The center was not large. 4 attorneys, 2 paralegals, a grants coordinator, and a rotating cast of law school clinic students who came in for 3-month stretches and left having learned more about the real practice of civil rights law than they'd absorbed in 3 semesters of classroom. The center's specialty was not high-profile litigation. It was documentation. The systematic, careful, properly filed documentation of civil rights violations that existed in the data and the complaint records, but that nobody in a position to act had decided to look at as a pattern. Claudette had been watching Southwest Airlines' complaint record for 3 years, not because she had a particular grievance with the airline, because her research applied consistently to 23 major service companies suggested that the airline industry had a structural complaint suppression problem. Complaints that were being filed but routed through channels that had no incentive to escalate them and every incentive to close them. She had written 2 published papers about it. They had been cited in academic journals and ignored by everyone else. She had been waiting for the right moment and the right case to file a petition with the Federal Aviation Authority, not for damages, not for a settlement that would resolve quietly and privately and change nothing, but for regulatory change. A mandate, a requirement from the federal level that airlines maintain independently reviewed complaint data and report it publicly on a standardized basis. The kind of change that takes a visible incident to catalyze. She had been waiting. Now she was on the phone with a journalist who had 112,000 live stream viewers and a name written on a yellow legal pad. "Can you come to Atlanta?" she said. "Yes," Emma Tran said. "This week. Tomorrow." "Good," Claudette said. "Bring everything you recorded." The meeting at the Civil Rights Law Center lasted 4 hours. Emma laid out everything she had, the full recording, the complaint, report data that Donovan had shown her in the brief scan on the plane, the statement from the airline, her handwritten notes. Claudette spread documents across the conference table that Emma had never seen. 3 years of aggregated complaint data cross-referenced against flight routes and crew assignments and incident outcomes. By the end of the 4 hours, Emma understood that what she had witnessed on the plane was not an isolated incident. It was an example. One documented, visible, nationally watched example of something that had been happening in the less visible spaces of the industry for years. She went back to her hotel and started writing. The article she wrote was not a hot take. It was not a viral opinion piece riding the momentum of the clip. It was a 4,000-word reported piece with documentation, with the complaint data, with a timeline showing the gap between when the pattern was visible in Southwest's own internal reports and when anyone with authority to address it had acted. She sent it to 3 publications. The first 2 were interested but asked her to make it shorter. The third, a medium-sized independent journalism outlet with a reputation for long-form civil rights reporting, published it in full on a Saturday morning 6 weeks after the flight. It was read 800,000 times in the first 72 hours. It was cited in a formal petition to the Federal Aviation Authority filed by Claudette Morgan's Center, co-signed by 12 other civil rights organizations 9 days after publication. The petition requested a regulatory review of airline discrimination complaint, handling mandatory public disclosure of complaint data aggregated by passenger race and incident type, and an independent audit framework. The FAA acknowledged receipt. They had 30 days to respond. 2 months after the flight, Southwest's updated complaint system received 23 new inbound contacts. Not new complaints, old ones. Passengers who had filed through the previous system, the one that routed everything through regional management and produced form letters, and who had heard about the restructuring and reached out again, wanting to know if their original complaints had been reviewed, wanting to know if anything had changed, wanting, most of all, to be heard by something that wasn't a form letter. Patricia Rollins assigned a team of 4 to review and personally respond to each contact. Donovan received summary updates each week. He read them the same way he had read the original 47, not as data, but as stories. The names were redacted in the summaries by protocol, but the details were specific enough to be real. And being real was what mattered. There were 3 that stayed with him. The first was a retired school principal from Memphis, 68 years old, traveling to his granddaughter's baptism. He had been in first class, an upgrade from his frequent flyer miles accumulated over 30 years of flying with the airline. A crew member had told him his upgrade was likely a system error and that he should take an economy seat while it was sorted out. He sat in economy for 2 hours while the flight attended to other passengers. When he finally raised the issue again, the crew member said she'd forgotten. He was returned to first class for the final 40 minutes of the flight. He filed a complaint, received a form letter and a $100 voucher. He had kept the voucher unused in a drawer. When he was contacted by the new review team, he said, "I just want someone to say they understand what that felt like. Not to fix it, just to say they understand." The team member who called him stayed on the phone for 50 minutes. The second was a 29-year-old doctoral student in biochemistry traveling for a conference presentation. She had been seated in first class when a crew member stood at her row and asked in front of several other passengers whether she was sure she was in the right section. She was sure. She had the ticket. The crew member, she said in her original complaint, looked at me the way people look at something that doesn't belong. Not like I was dangerous, just like I was out of place. And I still have to fly for work, and I'm afraid of feeling that again. She was afraid of feeling that again. Donovan sat with that sentence for a long time. The third contact was a letter, handwritten, from a woman in her mid-50s in New Orleans. She had witnessed, not experienced, a removal she believed was discriminatory involving an older black man on a flight from Houston. She had not been sure at the time whether she was reading the situation correctly. She had not said anything. She had not filed a report. She had been carrying the memory of it for 2 years. When she heard about the new complaint and witness report channels, she wrote a letter. "I don't know if it helps to tell you this now," she wrote, "but I should have said something then. I want you to know I should have said something. And I want whoever reads this to know that what I saw was real. I know what I saw." The letter had no ask in it, no demand, no request for compensation or response. Just, "I know what I saw." Donovan had the letter photocopied and included in the board's quarterly review materials. He did not make a speech about it. He just put it in the materials. If the directors read it and understood what they were reading, the letter would do more than any speech he could make. The 23 contacts and the 47 reports and the 3 stories above them and the tens of thousands of stories that preceded them. Stories that happened in terminals and jetways and cabin aisles and airports across the country. Small indignities and large ones, some filed and forgotten, and many never filed at all because the person it happened to had learned long ago that filing didn't change anything. All of it was a picture, not of a broken industry or broken people or broken intent. A picture of what happens when something wrong becomes ordinary enough that nobody inside the structure feels the need to call it by its name. Donovan had called it by its name, out loud, at altitude, on the record. He couldn't force what happened next, but the next thing had started. The announcement came from Southwest Airlines 6 weeks after the board vote. Not a press release, not a social media post. A direct, unformatted letter published on the airline's website and emailed to every registered passenger in its loyalty program. No corporate language, no passive voice, short sentences. The kind of writing that Patricia Rollins had insisted on after 2 rounds of revisions that removed the euphemisms the communications team kept trying to reinsert. The letter said, "We have identified a pattern of inconsistent and biased treatment of passengers of color in our premium cabin services. We have known for some time that this pattern existed in our complaint data. We did not address it quickly enough. We are addressing it now. It named 4 specific changes. The first was the restructured complaint review system, already voted on, already being built. Complaints routing directly to an independent board-level committee. Mandatory response within 7 business days by a human being, not a form letter. Annual public disclosure of complaint data aggregated by type and relevant passenger demographic factors. The second was the new training program, mandatory rebuilt from scratch, covering decision-making under pressure, the way bias operates in professional contexts, and the specific responsibility of crew members in positions of authority over passengers. Completion required before any crew member returned to active service. Ongoing refresher requirements every 18 months. The third was a witness and bystander reporting system, new. First of its kind in the major airline industry. A formal channel through which any passenger, not just the person directly affected, could file an account of what they witnessed. Anonymously, if they chose. Logged separately from crew reports so that the record could not be shaped by the people about whom a report was being made. The fourth was a commitment to third-party audit. An independent civil rights organization contracted annually with full access to complaint records and incident data reporting to the board, not to management. Donovan had written the outline of 3 of the 4 on a hotel desk at 3 a.m. with a yellow legal pad and a pen. The fourth, the bystander reporting system, had come from the letter. The handwritten letter from the woman in New Orleans who wrote, "I know what I saw." He had read that sentence and understood something. The problem wasn't only that incidents went unreported, it was that the people who witnessed incidents and said nothing felt afterward the specific weight of having not said something. And there was nowhere for that weight to go. No channel that said, "It's not too late. What you saw matters. Say it now." Now there was. He didn't announce any of this in a press conference. He didn't stand in front of a camera and explain his thinking. He gave Patricia Rollins the text of the letter, told her to simplify it until it was honest, and let her put it out. He went back to work. There were other things on the board agenda that month: quarterly earnings, a fleet expansion proposal, 2 committee reports that had nothing to do with Flight 2847 or discrimination or anything that had happened in the past 6 weeks. The business of the airline continued as it always did, with its enormous and constant demands. He worked on all of it. One afternoon in late November, 3 months after the flight, he received a text from an unknown number. "Mr. Reed, my name is Gerald. I'm the retired principal from Memphis. Someone from your office called me about my complaint. I just wanted to tell you personally that call meant something. First time in 30 years of flying this airline that I felt like a person and not a problem. Thank you." Donovan read it twice. He saved the number to his contacts. He typed back, "Thank you for writing. I'm glad it helped. Safe travels." He put the phone down. He went back to the quarterly report. An hour later, he stopped. He thought about something. He thought about the aviation book he had found in a donation bin outside a library in Vine City when he was 10 years old. The torn cover, the white, creased spine, the numbers inside that made sense to him in a way he couldn't explain to anyone because there was no one around him to explain it to. He thought about what it would have meant at 10 years old in Vine City to have someone call, to have someone say, "I see you," not as a problem, as a person. He thought about all the 10-year-olds who were not going to grow up to sit on boards, who were going to fly commercial the whole of their lives, who were going to walk through airports and board planes and sit in seats they had paid for and need not the protection of a business card, not the armor of a title, just the basic, uncomplicated dignity of being treated like a person who belonged in the place they had chosen to be. He thought about his mother. He thought about the 7 words. He thought they were not just for him. He wrote a note on the yellow legal pad. He would look at it again in the morning. Atlanta, in November. The air had the particular quality of a southern autumn, not cold exactly, not in the way that cities further north get cold, but changed. The light came in at a lower angle. The trees on Ruth Reed Street had lost most of their leaves, and the branches were bare against the pale sky in a way that made the street look more open than it did in summer. You could see further between the houses. Donovan drove himself. He didn't tell his mother when he was coming. He had a key. He let himself in. The kitchen smelled like onions and something slow cooking. Ruth Reed's kitchen always smelled like something slow cooking, as though she had decided decades ago that the house should always have a reason to be warm. She was standing at the counter when he came in, her back to the door, chopping vegetables with the small, efficient movements she had always used. Economical, and practiced the movements of someone who had prepared thousands of meals with limited time and had learned to make each motion count. She heard him. She didn't turn immediately. She set down the knife. She turned the burner down slightly, then she turned. She was 71 years old. Her hair had been gray for 20 years. She was not a tall woman. She had the kind of face that didn't hide much, not because she was expressive, but because she was honest. And honesty over a long life leaves particular marks. She looked at her son. "Sit down," she said. He sat. She made 2 cups of tea the way she had always made tea, no fuss water that had actually boiled, no shortcuts, and set one in front of him and sat across from him at the kitchen table with hers. She didn't ask about the flight. She had already heard about the flight. She had called him the night it happened. He had said he was all right. She had believed him because she had learned over 51 years to read the particular register of her son's voice, and the voice on that call had been steady, in the real way, not the performed way. She had been waiting for him to come. "The tea okay?" she said. "Yes, Mama." Silence. The comfortable kind. The kind that had been earned over decades. The burner made a low, steady sound. Donovan looked at his teacup. He had been thinking about how to ask the question for 3 months. He had been thinking about whether to ask it at all, whether there was a cost to it, to her, to both of them in the asking. He decided there wasn't. "Mama," he said, "on the bus, when I was 7, when that woman asked us to move." Ruth looked at him over the rim of her cup. "You said something to me," he said, "when we sat down in the back. 7 words. I've been carrying them my whole life. I've told people—" He stopped. "I've never actually told anyone what they were. I've just used them." He looked at her. "I want to know if I got them right, if they're what you meant." Ruth set down her cup. She was quiet for a moment, looking at her son, seeing in him, as she always could, as mothers can, the 7-year-old who had sat beside her and watched a woman in a cream blazer sit down in the seat they'd just been asked to leave. "Say them," she said. Donovan said the 7 words. "They can't take what's already yours." Silence. Ruth looked at him for a long moment. Her eyes were dry. She was not a woman who cried easily. She saved that for private. "Yes," she said. "That's right." She picked up her tea. They sat together in the kitchen for a while after that. The burner kept its low sound. The light through the window came in at the November angle warm and slanted, catching the edge of the table. Ruth told him about Mrs. Okafor's cornbread, about the hip that had been bothering her, about the lavender soap that was on sale at the drugstore again. He listened to all of it. Outside, the bare branches of the trees were still and clear against the pale Atlanta sky. When he left, 2 hours later, Ruth walked him to the door. He hugged her. She was smaller than she had been when he was a child, not in character, in body. Time did that. She held on for an extra moment. Then she let go. She went back inside. He stood on the porch for a moment. Then he walked to his car. 6 months after Flight 2847, Leanne Crawford was coordinating transport logistics for a community organization in the southwestern part of Dallas, the part of the city that doesn't make the brochures. She was learning new things every week. Some days were better than others. She had stopped reading news coverage of the airline industry. She had not thrown away the notebook. There was still a lot in it that she hadn't fully understood yet. She was working on it, slowly, without expectation of being finished any time soon. That was the work she had come to understand, not finishing it, just doing it. Captain Greg Hallowell passed his 12-month supervised evaluation with no findings. He flew his routes the way he had always flown them, competently, precisely, without incident. The difference was quieter than that. It was in the 3 seconds before he opened the cockpit door on a difficult morning when he had learned to stop and ask himself, "Whose eyes am I looking through right now? Are they mine?" He had not always liked the answer. He had learned to ask the question anyway. His son was 13 now. They had talked once carefully about what his father had learned. His son had listened. His son had said, "Good, you should know that." Then he had gone back to his homework. Hallowell had sat at the kitchen table for a long time after that, not moving. Donovan Reed's next flight out of Phoenix was 3 months after the one that changed things. Same route. Same airline. He was early. He found his seat 4A and settled in. The cabin filled around him. A crew member he hadn't seen before came through doing the pre-flight check. She stopped at his row. She smiled. "Can I get you anything before we take off?" He said, "No, thank you." She moved on. He opened his newspaper. Outside the window, the Phoenix morning was doing what Phoenix mornings do. The pale gold light gathering above the mountains, the desert turning from shadow to color as the sun came up. The plane began to push back from the gate. Donovan looked out the window at the sky. It was vast and ordinary and completely indifferent to what color you were or where you had come from or how many times someone had decided you didn't belong somewhere. The sky had always been like that. It had never needed changing. I think about this story a lot, not the flight itself. The moment on the bus. A 7-year-old boy watching his mother absorb a small, quiet humiliation without letting him see it land. And instead of bitterness, instead of anger, finding 7 words that were not about what was taken, but about what couldn't be. They can't take what's already yours. I've been thinking about what I carry that I've never examined. The pictures I have in my head of who belongs where. The assumptions I've made before anyone opened their mouth. The moments where I had the option to say something and chose the easier thing, the quieter thing, the path that cost me nothing and left someone else with the bill. We don't always get to be Donovan. Most of us will never have the board seat, the legal team, the moment where the radio crackles and the whole room understands they've made a mistake. But all of us have a bus. And all of us, at some point, will have to decide whether we say something. I want to be someone who says something. Drop your answer in the comments. I read every single one. And if this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Hit like, subscribe to our channel. We have more stories coming that will stay with you. This story was written with the assistance of AI writing tools, voiced with AI-generated audio, and illustrated with AI-generated visuals and licensed stock footage. All characters, names, events, and dialogue in this story are entirely fictional. Any resemblance to real persons living or deceased, or actual events, is purely coincidental.